Okay, today we're going to discuss cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is a process that the body uses to take glucose that it gets from eating and turn it into energy that the body can use for other purposes. And so really our essential question is going to be able to explain the products of the 3 steps of cellular respiration. So it's not so much a question as a task. Let's get started. So why do we need to eat? Well, we asked this question a lot as we studied macromolecules, but in terms of macromolecules, we needed to eat to get the blocks for the different molecules that we needed to build. Now we're going to simply focus on the fact that we eat in order for our bodies to gain energy. So our bodies actually take in food and they turn it into chemical energy. Well, what do we turn that energy into? Well, basically it comes down to glucose. And our bodies take in the glucose that's in the food and they turn it into usable chemical energy in the process of cellular respiration. And so the goal of cellular respiration is simply to turn glucose into as much energy as possible. So how does glucose enter into our cells? Well, it enters through membranes or through proteins in the cell membrane. The cell membrane itself is much too large, the glucose itself is much too large to get into the cell or get through the cell membrane on its own. So there are special proteins embedded or placed within the cell membrane that allow for the glucose to pass through. And so that's how glucose travels in. When we're talking about glucose, we're really talking about turning glucose into energy. So what does that actually mean? Well, the molecule that our body uses for energy is called ATP, and it has 3 phosphates. And the molecule itself is called adenosine triphosphate. When that 3rd phosphate is broken off, energy is released, and ADP is formed. So ADP, adenosine diphosphate, where the di means 2. So where ATP is the complete battery, ADP is the dead battery. And when we break off that 3rd phosphate, a massive amount of energy is released. So where we see tri and di come in regards to counting the number of the phosphate groups. And so what we're looking at is this constant, what we refer to as the ATP cycle. When a phosphate is broken off, the energy is released, ADP is formed. ADP goes through a process where the phosphate is added back in, the battery is now recharged, and it continues to cycle through. So, do only animals do cellular respiration, or do plants carry out this process too? Well, animals do cellular respiration, but so do plants. Plants make their own glucose in the process of photosynthesis, but they have to perform cellular respiration in order to get energy from that glucose that they just made. So plants and animals do cellular respiration. What organelles then does cellular respiration occur in? Well, cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondria. This is why the mitochondria is referred to as the powerhouse of the cell. And cytoplasm is the 2nd location for cellular respiration. There are 3 steps of cellular respiration that you are responsible for knowing. The first one is glycolysis, which occurs in the cytoplasm. Then the 2nd step, which is the Krebs cycle. And then the 3rd and final step, which is the electron transport chain. Krebs and electron transport happen within the mitochondria. A lot of times you'll hear me refer to the electron transport chain simply by the abbreviation ETC. It's just the same thing. So let's look at step 1, glycolysis. In glycolysis, 1 molecule of glucose is going to be broken in half into 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvate. Glucose has 6 carbons. Remember, its chemical formula is C6H12O6. So we take that C6, we bust it right down the middle into 2 3-carbon pyruvates. From this process, we get 2 ATP molecules. This is going to occur in the cytoplasm, and remember that this occurs without oxygen being used. Step 2 of cellular respiration then is the Krebs cycle. It's sometimes referred to as the citric acid cycle as well. They mean the same thing. This part of cellular respiration, though, can only occur in the presence of oxygen. That means oxygen has to be present in order for this part of the cycle to commence. That is why we refer to this as the first part of aerobic respiration, aerobic meaning with oxygen. From the Krebs cycle, we take the two pyruvates that were created in glycolysis and we break them down into carbon dioxide, which eventually the body exhales as a waste product. The Krebs cycle then also makes 2 ATP, but really what it is important that it produces then are some high energy electrons that actually go into the third and final step of cellular respiration. So right here is a process or a picture, I guess, of the Krebs cycle, aka the citric acid cycle, and you can see that it's extremely complex. I don't expect you to know this or want you to know this. I just want you to see that there's definitely a lot more that goes on in the citric acid cycle than what we just talked about. But what you are responsible for knowing is that we take the pyruvates and we break them down from what we get is the waste product of carbon dioxide and 2 ATP along with those high energy molecule carriers that we need for this, the third and final stage of cellular respiration. Step 3 is the electron transport chain, or the ETC. We get these high energy electrons. Remember, electrons are the part of the atom that are zipping around the very outside that cause chemical reactions and bonding to occur. Well, the body has figured out a way that they can actually use those electrons in a way to produce more ATP by utilizing the energy that's in them. And so these high energy electrons from the Krebs cycle get passed on to the electron transport chain. Remember, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain are occurring in the mitochondria, and both must happen in the presence of oxygen. So they're the only part of aerobic respiration, and this is truly the part of cellular respiration that gives the mitochondria its name as the powerhouse of the cell. Each time the electrons get passed, they release energy that pumps hydrogen across the membrane. And so you can see in this picture, hydrogen builds up and then it goes through a protein called ATP synthase, and then oxygen accepts the hydrogen at the end of the chain and produces water. So besides making ATP, this part of cellular respiration is where the waste product of water comes in as well. ATP synthase is able to make a total of 32 ATP from that single molecule of glucose. What's most important on this that you need to remember is that the electron transport chain has to have those high energy electrons from Krebs that come into the ETC that allow it to produce such a massive amount of ATP. As those electrons then, in the form of the hydrogen ions, pass through the ATP synthase, that large protein there embedded in the membrane, it actually spins. And so that is what allows the ATP to be made. And I have a process or a video for you to watch that actually shows this process. Remember that the energy in the electrons from the Krebs cycle comes to the ETC. The energy in those electrons passes through the membranes and creates the ability to make the 32 ATP. So these are our 3 steps of cellular respiration, and we go through this and we can see that in glycolysis we make 2 ATP, Krebs makes 2 ATP, electron transport makes 32, so we have 36, a total of 36 ATP made per molecule of glucose. All of this has relied on aerobic respiration, or having oxygen. So what happens if there is no oxygen after glycolysis? Well, if there's no oxygen after glycolysis, your body cannot enter the Krebs cycle. Instead, it goes into a process called fermentation. And this process is called anaerobic respiration because there's no oxygen. What happens then in fermentation? Well, fermentation produces lactic acid, which can be produced in your muscles during exercise when your body can't supply enough oxygen to the tissues. And so this is why your muscles get sore while you're exercising. Not the next day, that's something else. Because your body can't meet its energy needs. So if we go ahead and make a little flow chart here to show us the relationships between all of the portions of cellular respiration, we can see we have glycolysis. When there's no oxygen, it goes to fermentation. If there is oxygen present, it goes into Krebs and the electron transport chain. This box here, you need to know, it's a little handy dandy chart that shows the ins and outs of each part of the process of cellular respiration. And so you can see that glycolysis needs glucose coming in, out is 2-pyruvates, 2-ATP. Those 2-pyruvates then go into the Krebs cycle, and the Krebs cycle produces carbon dioxide, high energy electrons, and 2-ATP. The energy electrons then go into the ETC, and water and 32 ATP are produced. So you are responsible for knowing this part and understanding the process overall. So now let's go ahead and watch this video, which will show you a visual of what's actually happening in human cells.
All life on Earth depends on this tiny energetic molecule, adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. ATP drives biochemical activity inside your living cells and is a key building block of DNA and RNA. Generating ATP for your living cells are mitochondria, electrochemical batteries that convert energy from the food you eat and oxygen from the air you breathe into ATP. So where does your ATP come from? Deep inside your mitochondria, rows of molecular motors generate ATP, the molecule essential to all life on Earth. Enzymes bring together reactants to form a chemical bond, converting mechanical energy into chemical energy. A ring of enzymes work in step, creating 3 molecules of ATP with each cycle. Inside the molecular motor, a rotating axle powers the sequence. The axle is attached to a rotary molecular motor, moved by the force of protons pushing from the other side of the membrane. A difference in proton concentration propels the molecular mechanism. Synthesis of ATP. ATP drives biochemical activity inside your living cells and is a key building block of DNA and RNA.